Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today's video is a continuation of our coverage into Nvidia's laptop GPUs. We started with the GeForce RTX 2070 Max-Q, we've also reviewed the RTX 2060 for laptops, and now we're checking out the RTX 2080 Max-Q, which is supposed to be a decent amount faster than the GPUs we've looked at so far. As this discrete GPU is labelled as RTX 2080, we know it is using a Turing die complete with 2944 CUDA cores, 368 tensor cores, and 46 ray tracing cores. But that's where the similarities between the RTX 2080 Max-Q and the desktop RTX 2080 end. To bring what is normally a 215 watt GPU down into the 80 to 90 watt range for slim and light laptops, Nvidia has had to significantly underclock the GPU, with the base clock now sitting at just 735 MHz, while the boost clock hits 1095 MHz. I've talked about how Nvidia's laptop GPU naming scheme for the GeForce 20 series can be a bit misleading, and this is once again the case here. While Nvidia has differentiated this part from the regular desktop card through its name, slapping Max-Q on the end to let you know this is optimized for tiny laptop cooler designs, I think it is a bit much to even suggest this is an RTX 2080 class GPU. The clock speed delta between the RTX 2080 desktop and RTX 2080 Max-Q is the largest we've seen so far out of Nvidia's Turing products. While the desktop card typically hits 1900 MHz, the RTX 2080 Max-Q reaches just 1200 MHz. So this GPU won't perform anywhere near a desktop packing an RTX 2080, especially when factoring in other typical laptop bottlenecks. There's added confusion with this GPU because there appear to be two variants in the market, a standard default 80 watt version that we've been talking about so far, along with a higher clocked 90 watt variant. The 90 watt model has a base clock of 990 MHz and a boost of 1230 MHz, so a 135 MHz higher boost, which is a significant jump. This increase typically materializes as a typical GPU clock around 1400 MHz. Both variants have the same memory configuration, so 8GB of GDDR6 clocked at 12 gigabits per second on a 256-bit bus, leading to 384 gigabits per second of bandwidth. Again, this is one area where the RTX 2080 Max-Q is underclocked compared to the desktop card, which sits at 14 gigabits per second on the memory. For testing today, I have both variants on hand. The regular RTX 2080 Max-Q is found in the MSI GS75 Stealth 8SG, a slim and light 17-inch notebook. This laptop does have an overclocked mode available in the settings, and that boosts clock speeds by about 100 MHz, allowing it to sit between the 80 watt and 90 watt variants. But for today's review, I'm leaving the laptop at its default RTX 2080 Max-Q clocks. In the full review of the GS75, I'll detail how it performs in the OC mode. The 90 watt variant of the RTX 2080 Max-Q is found in the Alienware M15, another slim and light system, though this time 15 inches in size. This laptop struggles to make use of the 90 watt RTX 2080 Max-Q due to a constrained cooler solution. I'll detail more about this problem in my upcoming Alienware M15 review, but I did discover that raising the laptop a few centimeters above the desk does allow the GPU to operate at its maximum performance without overclocking, so that's what I've done for this review, and it should be representative of this 90 watt variant in other systems. Otherwise, the two systems are very similar. Both use Intel's standard 6-core gaming laptop CPU, the Core i7-8750H. Both also have dual-channel memory, which is very important for unleashing the best performance in games. So let's dig into the results, starting with Far Cry 5. I've decided to use a slightly different approach to showing this data than I have in the past. Rather than showing how our RTX 2080 Max-Q test laptops compare to other single laptop units, this data is an average of several laptops we've tested with the listed GPUs inside. To keep things as apples to apples as possible, the average only includes laptops with the same CPU and same dual-channel memory configuration. For example, our data for the GTX 1070 Max-Q contains an average of 3 laptops, which should be more representative of a typical laptop that uses that GPU. Anyway, Far Cry 5 is a title that is a fairly typical representation of most modern games. The RTX 2080 Max-Q sits at the top of this chart, although noting we haven't got any current useful data for the older GTX 1080 or GTX 1080 Max-Q. The base RTX 2080 Max-Q sneaks ahead of the GTX 1070, but only by 2% here. It's also only 5% ahead of the RTX 2070 Max-Q and less than 10% faster than the RTX 2060. However, the situation is better for the 90 watt variant, which delivers an additional 6% over the 80 watt RTX 2080 Max-Q. Battlefield 5 is a little more favourable to the 2080 Max-Q, with this GPU sitting 5% ahead of the GTX 1070. However, the 90W variant is only 3% faster than the 80W variant here. You will though get 9% more performance with the base RTX 2080 Max-Q over the RTX 2070 Max-Q. Metro Exodus is the newest title in our test suite, and it presents one of the largest gains between the two RTX 2080 Max-Q models, a 17% performance uplift. While the standard variant is only 1% faster than the GTX 1070, the 90W variant is a huge 18% faster. This is a game where you really will want that higher TDP model. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is a good result for the RTX 2080 Max-Q, 4% faster than the GTX 1070, 7% faster than the RTX 2070 Max-Q, and 10% faster than the RTX 2060. The 90W model also delivers a 10% higher frame rate than the base model, which is pretty decent. Middle-earth Shadow of War is highly favourable to Turing compared to Pascal, showing some of the largest margins. The RTX 2080 Max-Q is 16% faster than the GTX 1070 here, while also being 13% faster than the RTX 2070 Max-Q and 25% faster than the RTX 2060. And despite these large margins, the 90W model is 10% faster than the 80W model, delivering even better performance. Watch Dogs 2 is a game that is CPU demanding, which is why the 1% low results are a little unusual here. You also won't see much to gain at the high end with the RTX 2080 Max-Q, its 90W variant, and the GTX 1070 performing around the same level. That said, it's a step down to the other GPUs. For example, the RTX 2080 Max-Q is 13% ahead of the RTX 2070 Max-Q. Deus Ex Mankind Divided is an older title in our test suite, and again, a few weird 1% low numbers here due to some laptops having issues with this title. That said, there's a nice cadence between each laptop GPU here, with the 90W RTX 2080 Max-Q delivering a handy performance increase over the 80W model, at least on average. Lots of people still play Grand Theft Auto 5, and here the RTX 2080 Max-Q is on par with the GTX 1070, with the 90W 2080 Max-Q a smidgen ahead. With only a 10% difference between the GTX 1070 Max-Q and the top of the chart, these results are very clumped together. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the final game I'm showing here, and it's another one with a few inconsistent frame time results depending on the laptop being tested. It seems the GTX 1070 is particularly strong here. With that said, there is a bit to gain from both RTX 2080 Max-Q models when looking at average frame rates. Now it's time to expand into a number of extended comparison charts which show all the other games I've been testing. I'll start here with what I feel is the most relevant comparison, the RTX 2080 Max-Q versus the GTX 1070. The GTX 1070 was the sweet spot between price and performance for last generation Pascal systems, and most laptops that used it weren't outrageously massive. Here the RTX 2080 Max-Q in its standard configuration pulls 5% ahead on average, though it doesn't win in every game. A fairly modest improvement here. The 90W variant fares a little better here with a 12% average performance gain over the GTX 1070, although again it doesn't win in every title, especially in more CPU demanding games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Compared to the GTX 1070 Max-Q, the RTX 2080 Max-Q does see a handy 23% performance uplift. So if you are upgrading your slim and light laptop and jumping up a performance bracket at the same time, this is the sort of margin you can expect. It's a decent uplift, but it's nowhere near the 50 to 60% performance gain you can expect if you upgraded from a desktop GTX 1070 to a desktop RTX 2080. If you are hoping to see desktop margins between GPUs here, you're pretty much out of luck. Looking at the RTX 2080 Max-Q versus the RTX 2070 Max-Q, there is a bit to be gained for opting for the faster RTX 2080 model in your ultra portable. The standard variant is 10% faster on average, and that jumps up to 17% faster when comparing the 90W variant to the RTX 2070 Max-Q base variant. Then looking at RTX 2080 Max-Q versus the laptop RTX 2060, decent gains here again, 16% on average, and then increases to 23% when using the 90W model. RTX 2080 Max-Q laptops are considerably more expensive, but at least it's also a fair bit faster. Finally, we have the two RTX 2080 Max-Q models compared. Those who can find a 90W variant in a laptop should be treated to around 7% more performance, although there are some games where performance isn't significantly better. Looking at all this data, there is a lot to break down here, so be prepared for an extended conclusion. I guess the first positive point is that the RTX 2080 Max-Q is faster than the GPUs you would expect it to be, so there's no funny business here. It's also faster than other portable focused GPUs like the RTX 2070 Max-Q and GTX 1070 Max-Q by at least 10%, so it's not like you are paying a lot more money only to get a single digit upgrade. There are gains to be had at 1080p. Based on this data, I expect the RTX 2080 Max-Q to be slightly faster than the GTX 1080 Max-Q in its standard configuration, with the 90-watt variant delivering around a 10% boost. Nothing earth-shattering there, but again, it is an improvement. From here, there aren't too many more positive points to discuss. In fact, there are three major issues that I want to talk about: the two variant situation, the performance margins, and then the pricing of RTX 2080 Max-Q laptops. Starting with the two variant situation, this is perhaps the worst of the issues. Having two GPUs with different clock speeds and power limits, so ultimately different performance, but giving them the same name creates confusion. It makes it hard for consumers to know what they are buying when they see an RTX 2080 Max-Q laptop. Are they getting the slower standard version or the faster 90-watt version? There's really no way to know. Looking at the product pages for the two laptops I tested just highlights the problem. On the GS75 Stealth page, it tells you that you are getting an RTX 2080 Max-Q, but there's no information on clock speeds or TDP. Same thing on the Alienware M15 page. For a regular consumer looking at these laptops, there is no indication that the Alienware M15 actually includes the 90-watt variant and is therefore 7% faster on average. This isn't an issue with cooler design or throttling. Normally you'd expect some variances between laptops due to coolers and other hardware, but even if you supercharge the GS75's cooling solution, give it a super cold environment to work in, there is no way to make the GPU hit the performance levels of the 90-watt variant because it hits the hard-coded, unchangeable power limit of its variant before thermals become an issue. I could go on about this for ages, but really there were two simple solutions to this problem. Either you have one RTX 2080 Max-Q variant, preferably the 90-watt variant, and let any laptops that can't handle it throttle. Or you simply give each variant a different name. Nvidia has really screwed buyers over by not doing either because it's led to a situation where a buyer can't know which version they're getting from the product page. And they need to not only read reviews to find out what they're getting, but hope that the reviewer even knows that there are two versions out there, which so far hasn't necessarily been the case. So it pretty much is a complete mess. I do understand the motive behind having two variants. Having more GPU options allows a laptop maker to choose a product that best suits their cooler design. If they can squeeze an extra 10 watts of cooling capacity into their cooler, having a variant with a 10 watt higher power limit could give their laptop better performance and an edge over their competitors. But there is no reason why each variant shouldn't have a different name. It would even benefit the manufacturers who could design the better coolers because then they could easily advertise that their laptop has the more powerful GPU version inside. So Nvidia, we're still going to call you out every time you try and pull this stuff, whether it's for desktop cards like the GT 1030 DDR4 or for laptop GPUs. Just stop it and give each GPU an individual, easy to find name. The next issue we have is the performance margins, and this also links back into the naming, but it's less of an outright mess and more of just an annoyance with a drop of potential confusion on top. At face value, there's not much wrong with how the lineup stacks up. In the same slim and light gaming form factor, Turing GPUs are providing about 10% more performance than their direct Pascal predecessor, while also maintaining a 10% barrier between the RTX 2070 and RTX 2080 Max-Q models like there was for the GTX 1070 and 1080 Max-Qs. Considering laptops are highly constrained by size and power, that sort of improvement isn't bad given Turing is only a minor efficiency upgrade. The problem though is how the laptop ecosystem compares to the desktop ecosystem, and it's something I've talked about before. These Turing laptop GPUs are nowhere near the same performance levels as the desktop versions, but more importantly, the margins between each model are also not the same. On the desktop, the RTX 2080 is about 20% faster than an RTX 2070. Here with the standard Max-Q model, it's only 10%. On the desktop, the RTX 2080 is a massive 50% faster than a GTX 1070. Here with the Max-Q models, it's around 20 to 30% faster. And you'll find similar situations with basically any other comparison you want to make. The problem with this is down to market confusion. Nvidia launched the desktop GPUs first, and that set the standard for performance margins. Then the laptop GPUs hit the market and have entirely different performance characteristics, despite holding very similar names in some cases, or outright identical names in others. It creates a situation where an everyday buyer may have heard about the awesome performance gains of Turing for desktops, but then thought that this would also apply for laptops, only to then buy a laptop that's actually not that much faster, ending in, of course, disappointment. There's nothing wrong with giving 10% gains, but I just wish it was more obvious to buyers that they aren't going to get 20 to 30% gains. You can look to Intel for an example as a company that is doing this right. No one expects the 6-core Core i7-8750H for laptops to perform like the 6-core Core i7-8700K for desktops, because they have obviously different names. The final issue comes down to pricing. Laptops with Nvidia's top-end GPUs have never been cheap, especially portable versions using a Max-Q model. But with the 2080 Max-Q in particular, we're reaching pretty crazy territory. Take the Alienware M15 as an example. The RTX 2060 variant is $2,000 US, but it'll cost you an extra $850 to get the RTX 2080 Max-Q. So that's a 42% increase for 23% more performance. MSI is charging $400 or a 17% increase to go from an RTX 2070 Max-Q to an RTX 2080 Max-Q, despite the upgrade only providing around 10% more performance. Now, high-end products always come with a price premium, so we can't expect full price to performance scaling throughout the entire product stack. But the top-tier GPUs certainly are very expensive this generation, especially with Pascal options still in the market. When a decent GTX 1070 Max-Q laptop costs just $1,700 compared to an RTX 2080 Max-Q laptop for $2,800 or more, it's really hard to justify spending over $1,000 more on the Turing option. Of course, I haven't spent any time talking about Nvidia's RTX technologies in this video yet, but we've covered ray tracing and DLSS on the channel a fair bit in the past, so you can check out those past videos for our thoughts. On a performance-constrained laptop, these features really aren't all that useful, even with the RTX 2080 Max-Q, so we'd still recommend just disabling ray tracing, for example, and getting the better performance without that feature enabled. That's it for this review. Another disappointing mobile offering from Nvidia. I think there's a bit of a trend here with these Turing releases for laptops, and I don't have particularly high hopes of the remaining two models we have to test, the full RTX 2070 and the RTX 2080. Subscribe for more laptop content. The upcoming reviews of the MSI GA75 and Alienware M15 should be interesting because they don't perform exactly like we showed in this review out of the box. There's a few weird things going on there with those laptops. Consider supporting us on Patreon as well if you feel like it, and I'll catch you in the next one.